Hello again. We're in John Wesley Brady's chapter, Slave Trading and Bubble Finance. This is the last section of that chapter. The ever-growing array of lesser swindles aroused the wrath of the great company. So, on August 18th, the South Sea directors sued out writs of scirifacias against certain of the minor frauds. This action precipitated their own destruction. The explosion of the smaller bubbles, instead of diverting suspicion, reflected all too clearly the substance of the greater swindle. That is the South Seas bubble. Pressure rapidly was becoming tense. To seeing eyes, it already was clear that the great bubble must soon burst. Shortly prior to the legal actions of the South Sea Company, the paper value of the various bubble stocks was about £500 million, more than twice the value of all the houses and lands in Britain. Before the year closed, it seemed that their only remaining substance was the taste of dust and ashes in the mouth of disillusioned people. In September appeared the famous South Sea Ballad, soon to be sung up and down the streets of London. With humorous satire, it jeered the airy millions and scraps of paper wherein the nation was trusting, at the same time mocking the company, which, like the gods, turns nothing into all things, and predicting, at the end of the mad carnival, much hanging and drowning. Here's a segment of that song, the South Sea Ballad. Our South Sea ships have golden shrouds, they bring us wealth, 'tis granted, but lodge their treasure in the clouds to hide it till it's wanted. End of quote. In November came tidings from Paris that Law, deserted by the regent, had fled the country with vast stores of loot. In December, on the assembling of Parliament, the South Sea directors were ordered to produce their accounts. Pandemonium ensued. Knight, treasurer of the company, escaped to the continent with most of the incriminating documents, and the government seemed impotent to effect his return. Craggs, Secretary of State, committed suicide. The preliminary bribes of £574,000 were discovered, and the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer forced to resign. The glittering bubble had burst. There is a gulf where thousands fell. Here all the bold adventurers came. A narrow sound, though deep in hell, Change Alley is the dreadful name. Brady goes on, many who had developed habits of profligate luxury now found themselves beggars, in an age when friendships were frail and sentiments cold. Behold a poor dejected wretch who kept the South Sea coach of late, and now is glad to humbly catch a penny at the prison gate. So furious was the cry for vengeance that it was seriously proposed by Lord Molesworth, great name, Molesworth, in Parliament, to tie the directors up in sacks and throw them into the Thames. Professor R.H. Tawney, that modern economic historian, has left a memorable account of certain of the 16th century infamies of the famous Fugger bankers. That's capital F-U-G-G-E-R. Fugger bankers, whom, despite their pious trappings of Orthodox Catholicism, he depicts as the economic counterpart of the political morality typified in Machiavelli's Prince. Yet, compared with the men who engineered the South Sea bubble, says Tawney, the Fuggers had been innocents. The year 1720 is still remembered as that of the most colossal financial swindle in British history. As its last days ebbed away, it seemed that South Sea stock, which a few months before had sold at 1,060%, was worthless. Nor of the multitudes once in opulence who now faced the new year in destitution were all guilty of stock gambling. The collapse of this financial Tower of Babel buried many of the innocent with the guilty, for hundreds of honest businesses were ruined through the bankruptcy of their stock-plunging debtors. With the fall of the great company, Walpole's hour had struck. Very fortunately for him, he had quarrelled with his Whig colleagues in 1717, and being out of office had criticized mercilessly the South Sea schemes. This did not prevent him from gambling privately in the stocks, and by selling at an opportune time, making a good thing for himself. But that was his own affair. Now, by general acclaim, he was summoned to the helm of state, and nowhere was the rough genius of this coarse, cynical, drunken, but capable man, whose education at Eton and Cambridge had been designed to fit him for the church, more aptly displayed than in his handling of the South Sea debacle. Realizing that in such circumstances a statesman's duty was to restore public confidence, he opposed resolutely the cry for blind vengeance. And knowing that the state was as deeply involved as the company, he set himself to salvage whatever of the wreckage remained. Confiscation of the company's property would, he knew, not only have defeated the victims' interests, but also have involved the government in another panic. Most of the director's private property, however, he did confiscate, and this realized £2 million. Wisely, too, he released the company from the £7.5 million they had agreed to pay the state. And when all assets were pooled, he was able to pay 33% of its face value to all holders of South Sea stock. This was far more than sufferers in the hour of their despair had dared to hope for. Hence Walpole began his domination of 21 years hailed as a financial wizard, if not a national deliverer. But when the great Sir Robert revealed himself, it was obvious that his own financial principles were scarcely higher than those of the South Sea hoaxers, whom he had castigated. For all his sagacity and his love of peace, Walpole, as much as the slave traffic or the South Sea bubble, was an expression of his time. In a great age, with a great faith, he might have been a great man. In the England of 1721 to 1742, he came perilously close to being a great charlatan. And so ends the chapter on the slave trading and bubble finance. Now chapter 4, Brady goes on to chapter 4, the subject being politics, penal code, and prisons.